Happy Sunday. I posted earlier about how tired I've been this week, so I put on some red lipstick to help that shit out. Um, yeah, I usually have such an incredible amount of energy. And this last week, and I was sleeping amazing because I get up with the sun. Hello, everyone. And I go to sleep with the sun. And that's a practice I've been doing since my illness. Good morning. Yeah, I've been getting up with the sun and going to sleep with the sun for 9 years now, longer, 10. Um, and it's been amazing for my sleep. I get incredible sleep. So this last week, I got incredible sleep, but I still was waking up tired. And I was like, what is going on in the universe, in the stars? And then I had many clients go, oh, it's Pisces and Jupiter or something like that. But oh, Ryan's here. Ryan, you're so punctual. Thank you. All right, let's get you in. Anyway, yeah, so I've just been tired this week, and I'm like, okay, hello.
Hi,
Oh, it's
how's
so
it
nice
going,
to see
Unique?
you.
It's great to see you too.
Yeah, this is a joy that I don't get very often because I don't do Zoom calls, and I get requests to do Zoom calls, but I don't because I'm actually very distracted by looking at people. So I'm like, no, no Zoom calls.
Well, it's good to finally get to meet each other face to face. We've done the call several
Yeah,
times, and those have always been awesome, and I'm happy to get to join you live here.
thank you so much for joining me today. And it's not people say you need to do more lives, and I'm like, not everybody wants to go on a live with me and share their very personal
Yeah,
health story. So thank you.
well, yeah, a little nervous to be honest, so trying to get the jitters out
Me
early.
too, and I do this. So yeah, I'm with you. Like I still to this day, even though I've been doing these for a couple of years now, I'm so every time nervous. So
Yeah, good to know
you're
it's
not alone.
it's normal with my
So you were diagnosed in, can you hear me?
yes, I can hear you. I got you right here. Am I coming in?
Okay, there you are.
Okay.
So you were, there you are. Yeah, I can
Okay,
hear you
sorry.
now. It's a little,
It's a little
oh, okay.
scratchy.
Yeah, people are a little scratchy, but I think we're good. So I guess
Uh,
why don't you just go ahead and tell your story of Crohn's? I know that there's a history of Crohn's there in your family, autoimmune, if
mhm.
I'm not mistaken. And
Yeah.
yeah, talk to me.
So, yeah, big history in my family. My grandmother passed away from it back in 65. I have cousins on both sides of my family tree that have Crohn's as well, or colitis, or some variation of that. And then I actually struggled with it as young as third grade. I had some stomach issues and honestly had totally forgotten about this until speaking with my family more recently. Um, and it kind of just went into remission and went away, and I didn't think about it anymore. And then in 2018, I had just moved back to Charlotte from New York and uh, started having some stomach issues, started with passing blood, and just immediately was like, okay, this isn't normal. Went to a doctor, got diagnosed. They put me through everything super fast, getting me on a protocol of steroids, trying antibiotics, trying probiotics, trying all sorts of different trial and error things, and eventually had to go on Remicade, um, which if people aren't familiar with that, it is a infusion that you get hooked up to. For me, it's once every 4 weeks. A lot of people every 6 weeks, every 8 weeks, but it's an immune suppressant, which it is designed to suppress your immune system because usually a lot of Crohn's issues is because of an overactive immune system. So that's
Why
how
every four
Remicade came.
weeks for you?
So I started on the every 8 week plan, and they started me at a low dose just to see how it would respond. And I would get like 2 weeks of relief, and then I would just be right back to being miserable. Whether it was passing blood, gas, frequently having to go to the restroom, cramps. I mean, it was just a disaster. And so then they upped the dose, and that helped. And so they got me maxed out on the dose, but then they're like, okay, it still wasn't getting me to that 8 week mark. So then they started shorting the durations, and then finally it was every 4 weeks was just my happy medium. So that's what I've been doing since then. Um, but and it helped a lot, but it was still kind of there's a missing gap there, which is how I ended up coming to you. Um, and I don't know how much
And
you want me to talk or
do you? Oh yeah, no,
so.
this is your story mostly, so I'm just here as kind of like a supporting cast member. But uh, how do you feel? Because you've been on Remicade for how long now?
So I guess it's probably somewhere around 2 years, a little over 2 years, I would say, because it started in 2018, and we did a lot of the trial and error stuff starting in May of 2018, and it wasn't probably until that following January or February that they got me started on it. So a little over 2 years now of doing the Remicade infusions. And so I did those, and it was a lot of trial and error in the beginning, getting me on the right dose. And finally I got there, but it was just the progression seemed to kind of hit plateaus. And
Mhm.
it was better, but I didn't feel like I was really getting as well as I could be. Like there was more things that could be done, and I just wasn't really satisfied with the progression of things. And so, but tried everything, tried all the supplements, consulted with family, consulted with doctors, Googled things until finally my girlfriend Melissa actually turned me on to Lacey Phillips' podcast, who had Karen Hurd and you as special guests. And specifically, she's like, you have to listen to this podcast. This woman had Crohn's and has gone into complete remission and reversed everything with this bean protocol. And, you hear beans and you're like, that sounds really bizarre, and it just didn't compute right away. But I listened to the podcast, and they were highly informative and based in facts that you can look up that is scientific in terms of the way that your body detoxes things and gets rid of them out of your body, and the way that your liver, you know, detoxes things, and then it's reabsorbed in the ileum and all those things. And it just made sense. And I was like, okay, I've tried everything else. Let me try this. Like, and because at the beginning I was told nothing with husk was allowed, and that
I
was
know,
something
no
I ate a
fiber. I
lot
was told
of.
the same thing. It was like I had to be on
Hmm.
a no fiber diet, and it's like, and I remember at the time going, that makes sense because if you think about what's going on in there, there's inflammation and fiber is like
Hmm.
a scrub brush. So in your mind, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. I'm staying away from all things fiber and, following protocols based on that. And
Oh
so
yeah.
when Karen's protocol found me and it was all beans, and I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah, it didn't make yeah, it broke my brain kind of reading that after spending 2 years of building habits that were the opposite of eating like crackers and rice and things that honestly in digestion. And that was a big issue for me. It was just, I don't want to get too graphic with it, but it was just for a long period of time, at least a year and a half. It's just like there wasn't a day that went by that I didn't have a bowel movement that had some blood in it, which is terrifying to go through that. And there's something going on inside, but you can't see it. It's not like when you get a cut or a bruise or something on the surface, you can see it. Like I know that this will heal. You're just kind of hoping for the best. And eating the way I was eating, I just felt like I was getting more malnourished. I wasn't, because I had to cut out salads and I had to cut out a lot of the seeds, and then obviously like things like corn were out the window, but that didn't bother me as much. But just changing your diet so much and then having to suddenly, okay, I can work beans back in, and the difference was almost instant within like a week of working just really well cooked beans into my diet, chewing them really well, making bean dips, or just finding different ways to get it in there so that it was easy for my stomach to process. And within a week, because during this whole process my skin started breaking out. um, it was becoming, I was almost dehydrated looking. My skin would crack a lot because I worked at a facility that had a lot of chemicals and things like that. So any interaction with that, just instantly my skin was fried. I just didn't have the capacity to heal myself at that point. And so instantly my skin started clearing up. The acne and things, and I had always had very clear skin, and I've got clear skin now, but that was like one of the first things that started fixing itself was my skin started getting better. And so I was like, okay, something is definitely happening. And it was even mentioned in the podcast that, that's the first thing you're going to notice is that your skin's going to get a little better. It's going to get a little bit brighter. And, but admittedly, I drug my feet in going full go on the protocol when it first came up, because there's a lot that you have to sacrifice, and or at least it feels like a sacrifice at the beginning when you're so used to living your life a certain way. And I come from a family where food is just how we bond and how we connect. And uh, so it took a lot for me to finally break away from those things. But once I finally started breaking down those walls, and caffeine was the biggest thing for me to get away from, and I finally did that back in February. And the difference of how I feel is night and day. Like there's benefits that came along with it that help with more than my stomach that I didn't expect. Anxiety reduction being the number one thing that I feel like I've gotten out of it is that yeah, I just feel a lot more even keeled all the time, which is nice. Not
Yeah.
going through the peaks and valleys and chasing those things, taxing, and it exhausts you and you're trying to get better. And that process.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
might
and
have a
it's
little
it's a
breakup.
hard one for people to give up because it's so ritualistic, and it's
Hmm.
and it's another way we bond. So even if we are alone, we can go to a coffee shop and that ritual bonds us immediately to everybody else there for
Yeah.
their morning cup, right? Whatever the
Oh,
process
yeah.
is. So it's and then some people are like it's their ritual at home. It's the thing that they do before everybody else gets up. And so you're
Hmm.
suddenly you're saying, and also doctors, they say avoid fiber, but they're not like, hey, cut out your coffee and cut out your this and cut out your that. They're like, take this and go on your merry way. Most
Yeah.
doctors, not all doctors, but a lot of doctors. And to me, I remember the conversation of like, yeah, you get this or the infusion or whatever it is you're going to end up doing for your Crohn's, and then you can just live your normal life. And I just remember going, wait, my normal life is what effed me over in the first place.
Hmm.
Why would it be okay that I can go back to living my normal life? Like
Right.
something has to change because you can't do the same thing and then expect different results. And I just remember my brain after that conversation going, this doesn't compute. It's what I want to hear, but it doesn't
Hmm.
compute. How is it possible that this is okay?
And that was a big thing, was getting over the like what I want to hear and what I want to do and what actually needs to be done. And I was stubborn, kicking and dragging my feet the entire way. My girlfriend had to be the one who really was like, "You're still drinking caffeine." And then even I was trying to get away with decaf. She's like, "There's still some caffeine in there." And so finally, I'm like, "Okay, get all the caffeine out of the house, all the coffee. I'm going to do this." And I dealt with and I had the full 9 days of missing caffeine and going through the withdrawals and all those types of things. And then I got through it. And then every week after that has just been a steady, like just even better jumps than I was making before.
Hmm.
And it's just once you kind of talk yourself out of those biases that you build up, that, oh no, I'm different, I can do this, it's fine. Um, you actually can start making that real progress. And so it took me a while to get there. And now I'm as honed in and focused on this as I've ever been. And even finding more ways to kind of like stick to that grind and stick to that schedule, and being comfortable with, not conforming to those social cues and those social pressures when they come up of, um, a good example is it's actually my niece's birthday weekend, so there's all sorts of cakes and cupcakes and cookies and candies
Oh,
and
yeah.
everything going around. And so it's like, it's a good test to get to say no, because I have a huge sweet tooth and I've always had a huge sweet tooth. And so that's one that I'm getting over.
Not an uncommon thing for people with autoimmune, honestly, and just chronic illness in general. Usually, the one thing we all share is being absolute sugar addicts. And
Hmm.
I was no different. I joked that my first book's title was going to be Snickers for breakfast because I loved sugar that much. And to realize that it was feeding my inflammation
Hmm.
basically like fire in California and a Santa Ana wind. And
Yeah.
I think there's such a disconnect between it because we love it so much. It hits all of those pleasure points, in our body and our brain. And um, yeah, so I remember just being like, okay, I have to come to terms with the fact that this food that I love so much does not love me back. And it's going
Hmm.
to interfere with the longevity of my wellness. And how am I going to navigate that? And also, stop looking for excuses because if my daughter had a birthday, I'd be like, oh, I'm going to taste her birthday cake. And
Hmm.
that's acceptable. Nobody's going to take that away from me. Or if I go on vacation or something, and I really had to shift of like, no matter where I go, my health is going to follow me. There is no such thing
Hmm.
as a vacation for my health. And if I want to stay in remission, which is my greatest goal in life, is to never have another Crohn's flare. And I feel like that's within my control. So
Hmm.
if it's within my control, is there anything better than that?
Yeah.
Nah, nah.
And that's the point that I finally had to get to as well. And I think that that's the point that everybody gets to eventually, is that whatever the thing is that they're dealing with, like you just have to get to that breaking point of anything is better than this. Like,
Yeah.
and after being in that position and seeing my health come back the way that it has, because it was like before I felt like I was just living with it, but now it's like I'm finding ways to beat it and like to continue living my life just like a fully functioning person where my energy isn't depleted all the time, uh, and I don't have to think as much about food like I used to. Honestly, which has been very freeing in that I'm not constantly struggling and panicking like, okay, what am I going to make to eat tonight? What am I in the mood for? It's just very automatic, the things that I reach for in my kitchen now and the things that I go and get at the grocery store now. And it's just full of like meat and veggies and beans, like at any given moment. And that's pretty much all that we have here now. But and then we enrolled in cooking classes through the pandemic and stuff like that so that we could continue to, because ordering out is crazy expensive. But I
Yeah.
don't even have that craving anymore because we make all our favorite things at home now. And so that's been a big transition. But yeah, I just getting over that hump and coming from where I was to where I am now. And it's weird to think about that it's been like a year of being on the bean protocol and then really a solid 3 or 4 months of like really committing to it and not just eating beans, but really getting rid of those other things that facilitate feeling bad. And I'm the same like you. Like for me, I want to get into remission, and because I feel like I am so close to there, but until I consult with my doctors and they're like, okay, you're like, this is what we would consider remission. But I mean, it's like, I feel so much better than where I was a year ago. Um, and then I just want to get to the point to where it's like, okay, now we can start walking back the Remicade and hopefully get to that point, because that's the scary thing that they pitch you when they start you on these medications. It's like you're gonna have to do this for the rest of your life, and now I feel like that might not necessarily be the case. Like I might be able to manage my life on my own without having to come to this place anymore, and so that's the goal for me now.
And that's an amazing goal. And I love that, to me, what I say to people who come to me with that, I'm like, this is your journey. And the best part about, you know, eating for health and doing what you're doing is that you're giving your body as much ammo as possible to kind of like beat back the inflammation and put your body in a strong place so that should you guys decide to, push it back, you can see how your body's responding to that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's such an important conversation. And especially when you have a doctor that is open to that conversation. I couldn't find anybody at the time, and this is a while ago now, for myself, who was even remotely okay with that conversation of like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually going to take care of myself. And because I'm going to actually take care of myself and put in the time and effort, can you support me getting to where I want to go of not having a life of medications? And I never went on because I was just like, you're not even willing to have a conversation with me about it. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's such an important thing to have a doctor in your life that is like, I'm open to the conversation. The doctor who ended up supporting me was a wonderful medical doctor here in LA who's also Eastern and Western trained. And he was like unique and, not an easy thing to do when you're looking at your client, your patient who's sitting there, who's 90 pounds and hair and teeth or gums are bleeding and everything is obviously not going in a good direction. And
Yeah.
I'm sitting there going, I'm going to do this naturally. And he's like,
Yeah.
I believe you. And I was like,
Yeah.
what? He's like, yeah, I
It's
believe you, and I was like, oh shit, because I don't even know if I believe me, but this is something that I need to figure out for myself. And he was like, the power of belief is so important. And if this is, I'll keep an eye on you to make
mhm.
sure you're okay, but so you don't kill yourself, but you
Yeah.
know, I
Yeah.
believe you.
Yeah.
I was like,
No, and
okay.
it's refreshing to hear that from somebody, especially in the medical community, because and a big supporter of modern medicine. I do believe that like there's so many miracle cures and things that have been created even just in the past year. Um, so, but it's one of those things that a lot of times it's not the thing that's going to cure you. It's going to get you to kind of live with whatever the thing is that you have. And that's kind of how I felt like I was going through my experience. But I was so panicked when I first started experiencing everything, because when you start seeing blood show up, like the worst thing I thought was like, is this like some type of stomach cancer or something that could
Yeah.
be happening? And
Yeah.
then it ends up being Crohn's, and so you're kind of like, okay, well that's not a death sentence anymore, compared to like when my grandmother went through it, and compared to, I mean, my aunt hasn't, she's had to do the surgeries, and I was like, I really don't want to have to go through all the things that I know they went through. And so, I mean, I was really aggressive in the early going in terms of pursuing things. And I called my cousin, and she was the one who told me, well, I've done Remicade and it's like changed my life, like by getting on that. And so, they were like, well, you might have a good chance of, of it working because the genes are similar and the body might respond similar. And so I got on that, but it's one of those things that I'm like, I'm not trying to do this forever either. I mean, it's like this got me to where I could live my life again, and it was manageable, and I wasn't going to the bathroom 10 times in an hour, or, you know, dealing with all those different issues that came along with it. Because I mean, like I said, you're malnourished because you can't eat the things that you want to eat or that you think you should be eating. You're just trying to get the most easily digestible thing. And then the sugar thing was also, I feel so bad. I just want to feel, I want to have a little something good in my life. And so that's what sugar kind of was, is I'm going to have these sweet treats that are just real easy to digest. There's no nuts, there's no seeds, and like not realizing you're fueling all that bad bacteria. You're fueling all that stuff that's causing the inflammation and making things worse for yourself. And it's like, and once you don't have sugar, you're no longer craving sugar. But it's like once you have that first bite, it's like, okay, now I'm just chasing this feeling
Patient the
all day. Yeah,
dragon. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, and it was slipping me. Yeah, exactly. And so, and that was like that with the caffeine were the two things that I finally had to really commit to. And now that I have, and I'm, in that 3 month range of like really feeling the differences of everything. I was thinking about it the other day, and I'm like, I'm way less anxious.
Mm.
And even Melissa was saying, she's like, you were so much more relaxed right now than I've
Mm.
seen you in probably years.
Mm.
And so, which is a great thing, like, to, especially given everything that's been going on. It's like, it's nice to be in a place where like my headspace is a little bit calmer.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
because
because
where I was,
you guys also went through COVID, right? Together.
mm-hmm,
You guys,
yeah,
first of all, you guys are an amazing couple because you're supporting each other, eating for health, and
well, thank you.
bringing you the beans was probably a big deal on her part because it's like,
Oh yeah.
here's this crazy bean thing that I'm going to tell you
Mm-hmm.
about for Crohn's disease, and guess what? It's the very thing that nobody wants you to eat, which is fiber, right? So,
Oh yeah, yeah. Like I said, when I first heard about it and thought about it, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. But then as soon as I started listening to the podcast, it totally clicked. And she's been amazing through the entire experience, because she put a lot of things on her plate in terms of going and finding alternative methods of treating things, whether it was supplements, whether it was podcasts, whether it was finding you, and luckily bringing you into my life, because it's like, I don't know where I would be today if it hadn't been for getting on that protocol. Because when COVID first broke out, I was still in a very like traumatized place because I was still sick. And you're hearing about, oh, well, if you're immune compromised, you need to be especially worried. So I was a wreck of anxiety and nerves of just, okay, what's going to happen here? Like, I don't know what's going on. Italy was shutting down. Like, everything was just terrifying at that point in time. And so, I ended up leaving the job that I was at, and then we went into a quarantine with family. And I, spent time trying to get myself in a better headspace. And as more information came out, and then the further along I got with the protocol, the more I saw my health increase, and the more I was like, okay, I think I'm going to be okay with this. And it finally got all the way to April. We make it through the whole quarantine, and we're living on our own. And Melissa comes down with COVID, and she just thought it was like allergies for the first like couple days. And she goes, you know what, I'm gonna go get a COVID test just in case, just to be safe. I don't think this is anything. And then she gets the test back, and then she ends up getting a bit more sick at that stage. And then sense of smell went. She was like, yeah, I definitely have COVID. So and then I came down a couple days later, and it was, I mean, it was a gut check because I mean, we were certainly scared when we got the positive test back, and we're like, okay, well, we just need to lock down. We're going to be okay. And I mean, it was tough. It was, you know, I was definitely sick. I tell this everyone, I'm like, certainly don't recommend the COVID experience. Like, but it wasn't as bad as of an experience as I think it could have been had I not been eating for my health and having my body regularly kind of cleaning itself out now. Because I mean, I feel like that's just what the Bean Protocol does, is it helps facilitate all that stuff out that needs to be getting purged.
Yeah.
And I was 4 days out from a Remicade infusion, which is when
Mm-hmm.
your immune system is most compromised.
Mm-hmm.
So there were some nerves there when we got the test back, and I was like, okay, this is happening now. But I mean, we got through it. It was fine. We just kept eating. We rested. We drank a lot of water. We took vitamin D supplements. We tried to uh, get the dog out in the sunshine when we could, and just, you know, stayed to ourselves, and we got through it. And I mean, I had other experiences with bugs that I had, like bugs and viruses that I had come in contact with, that like definitely took me out for a harsher count. Um, with dealing with the Remicade, and but I wasn't on the Bean Protocol at that time. And I really do think that where I am now, if it had happened a year ago, I don't know if I would have been able to hold up as well. And
Did you end
so
up getting the infusion that, or did they recommend that you get it even though you were having COVID?
so the like afterwards, yeah, I went for my next one, and I told them right when I got in, I was like, just so you guys know, I did have COVID like 2 weeks ago. And they're like, oh wow, well, how are you doing? And they, I mean, they were totally fine as long as I just wasn't actively having COVID.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, they were like, you should be good now. So, and then I'm planning on meeting with my doctor again to kind of discuss, you know, all that type of stuff in the future. But I had a doctor's appointment set up to have that discussion about like what their thoughts were with Remicade and the vaccine and Crohn's and all that stuff. And then I got sick with COVID, and I had to cancel the appointment. And so now I'm on the back burner to go in again. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, we had it, and I mean, it's surreal to think that we've already had it and been through that and
Yeah.
everything now looking back, because it was so scary at the beginning, and then it's like looking back, it's like, okay, we got through it. I mean, it hurt. It was like the flu. I mean, your body hurt, you were feverish, the fatigue was very real. That was like the craziest thing, was just you'd think you had energy, you get up 5 minutes later, like, no, I don't, I'm gonna go lay back down. And
Did it feel,
so
did you have any lung stuff? Because some people, some of my clients,
mhm.
most of my clients have got through it really well who've had it, but some of them are like, oh yeah, you feel that kind of like something sitting on your
Like
chest.
yeah,
Yeah.
those first 2 days, I really noticed the lungs were more like heavy, which is what my first inclination, because we didn't have our test back yet. But I was
Mhm.
thinking this might be COVID as soon as I kind of felt that breathing aspect of it. Um, but that was really for only 2 days. The weird thing was that it seemed like a different symptom kind of took over each day.
Mm.
It did throw off my digestion, which I don't.
Mm.
It seems like if whatever thing you kind of are dealing with, it kind of really gets in there and makes it worse.
Yep.
So my digestion did get thrown off for like several days, like in terms of like times and consistencies and things like that. It was just like, okay, I was having a great month, and now this is kind of weird. But got through that, and then once we got over it, we kind of just went back to doing more simple, a simple diet for like a week, and
Mhm.
then it kind of just balanced everything back out, because
Awesome. And are
our
you
appetite
able,
was shot.
yeah. Are you able to eat fats? Like, is your
Oh
do you
yeah,
feel like you're perfect?
fats are great.
Awesome.
I use a lot of olive oil, a lot of avocado oil, and a lot of peanut butter,
Awesome.
and a lot of my
And
dishes.
you're
So
blending everything now, like beans and fats and everything, or do you still get some beans away from fats?
I still do some beans away from fats, but then I have other dishes that I have them mixed together.
Perfect.
I'm pretty wide open with it. I just make sure that I'm having beans consistently throughout the day, and we got a nice new powdered psyllium husk that is been much better for both of our digestions in terms of helping assist with things when we're just not in the mood to have another bowl of beans.
Perfect.
Because sometimes you just want to have a quick drink before bed and you don't want to go to sleep with anything heavy on your stomach. So, but the psyllium fiber's been great too. But yeah, we just try to find ways to get it beans almost with every meal for me.
Awesome.
And Melissa's probably every other meal.
Melissa's awesome. You guys are awesome
Yeah,
together.
she's so
I
great.
honestly, I
I
see the
appreciate that.
greatest success in couples when they get on board together. Because the latter, it's like one of them is having to come to terms with the fact that they're eating very different foods. And
Hmm.
I know from my experience that was really hard because my kids were young and so they were like eating ice cream after dinner or whatever at the time, and my husband would be eating whatever, and I'd be sitting there with like, I was really sick, so I was sitting there with just kind of like nothing, and it was dry,
Yeah,
and
yeah, and yeah, and not very exciting,
and not
and
exciting, and I'm
yeah,
looking at them just being like, "Ugh, ugh."
yeah. That's the hard part. Yeah, you go visit other people, and it's like, man, I miss those things. And
Yeah.
but having Melissa there, and now that especially that we're no longer having to quarantine the family anymore and things like that, she's really led the charge in holding my feet to the fire and keeping me like on it and honest with myself. Because at the end of the day, like that's who you're cheating the most with all this stuff by trying to escape like the reality of what you're dealing with. And it's hard. I mean, it was hard. You know, there's still days where you get tempted to want to have things, but you just remember like where you came from and the things that you've already had to deal with and whether or not it's worth it. And you know, and it's gotten to where I know my body a lot better than I did before, which is like a good thing, a great thing.
Yeah, and I think the hard pill to swallow for me was realizing how much power I had over my health story. And I could choose to do what it takes to maintain my well-being, or I could find a lot of excuses as to why I couldn't. And at the end of the
Yeah.
day, the only person who was going to suffer was going to be me, and
Mm-hmm.
then therefore my family because of what that would mean. Um, so me getting the tools I needed to overcome my relationship with sugar and make it a non-issue in my life, because it was an issue even after I went into remission. I struggled with that relationship of like,
Oh yeah.
I'd have to really force myself not to have stuff, and I took up so much energy not having it. And finally I was able to transcend that place of like forcing myself to not have it to now where I'm like, it's in the house. I have other family members in the house who I don't control and
Mm-hmm.
don't try to, and
Yeah.
what they have is their business, but I no longer even have the, it can't be in the house because if it is I may want to have it. Whereas now
Mm-hmm.
it's like there's all kinds of stuff in the house and I'm like, we all have to, but it's not hard for me, and I don't have to not do it anymore. And I think, for a lot of my clients now where the world is opening up again, that it's going to be interesting to see how everybody navigates being exposed to all of the normal things again that are not
Mm-hmm.
so great for a person whose body isn't normal.
Right. And yeah, because that's the thing is, you know, what my concept of normal was has now changed for me of what that gets to be and what that is going to be. And um, you know, it changes the way that you even look at the food and the way that you have that relationship. And it's like, and I'm still going through that process of it changing, but I know it's changing because something that used to be instinctual is now something that I have like conflict over, or it's like something that there's a voice in my head like reminding me, okay, no, that like you should probably walk that back. You don't need to have whatever it is that you think you need to have right now. Like you're gonna regret that. You're gonna end up noticing a change, and you do. Like you get to where you can notice those changes in your body and your digestion and your whole the words kind of escaping me right now, but your whole cycle that you go
Yeah,
through in a
your
day.
nervous system, your
Hmm.
digestion. And I think that was the thing. It was like I tried to bully myself into not being sugar free, and that didn't work. And when I was sick, it was
Yeah.
easy because nothing helped. So it was easy to cut it all out.
Hmm.
But then when I was healthy again, that's actually when the work began, because
Hmm.
when I was healthy, I could almost lie to myself that it's fine. It's fine. And, you know, I even talk about this in my next book that I'm finishing now, finally finishing, is that, you know, I went through a year of trying to have this idea of balance that you see in the world.
Hmm.
Um, and I just would like have a little bit of dark chocolate and I'd have a latte and, you know,
Hmm.
and it was all very measured and it was all very like, okay, this isn't a ritual for me, but I'm going to have it here and there and I'm just going to create this. And
Hmm.
after that year of exploration, I just noticed that nothing was as good as it was. And
Hmm.
so then I had to have a more honest conversation with myself of like, okay, if nothing is as good as it was, is that really the tightrope that I want to walk? You know,
Hmm.
that I could bring on a flare because I'm not really truly taking care of myself. And is this whole conversation even worth it? And I slowly, with a lot of compassion to myself, just began to slowly like sweep the things out of my life that I started calling foods that didn't love me back. And it was like, okay,
Hmm.
these foods don't love me back. I love them. This is like a
Yeah.
one-sided love affair, you know, like this is
Yeah.
not good.
This is an abusive relationship.
This is an
Like,
abusive
yeah.
relationship. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I have several foods that are like that to this day that, and you know, it is that coming to grips with, all right, it's okay though that that's gone because I am actually getting a benefit out of this and I've
yeah.
actually noticed the benefit and seen the benefit. And
Yeah.
um, that's the hardest part because it takes time and like
Yeah.
that progression isn't linear. Like there's going to be drop offs and days where it's like, I'm doing everything right. Why am I feeling bad today? And it's just,
Hmm.
you know, your process and your system and your cells are repairing themselves and that takes time and
Yeah.
everybody is going to heal at a different pace. And so,
And also the
um,
amount of stress that you're pumping, right? So it's funny because I think in every chronic illness ever listed, stress is in it. And I think we're so
mhm,
used to seeing it that we almost feel like it's a generic excuse, right? It's
yeah,
like, oh, like, you know, stress makes everything worse and it's involved in every single chronic condition in the human body. And yet, if you guys are anything like me, you're like, stress. And it's life. And then when you actually
mhm,
start to look at the continuous loop that happens from mind to nervous system to gut
mhm,
and kind of how all of those things work together and you realize there's this constant feedback loop going on. And so if you're constantly processing stress and adrenaline and epinephrine and norepinephrine and you're dumping that into your
oh
gut
yeah,
and you're like, well, I'm eating really well, so why am I not feeling as great? And I can look at the days where I'm stressed and go, ah, yeah, okay. Like,
mhm,
I would love to minimize stress because it almost feels like a generic thing. Like, yeah, we're all stressed out. So,
yeah, yeah,
but if I actually like after our live go and have some beans and just chill
mhm,
out, I'm going to be fine and I'm not going to have any stomach issues later. But before understanding that this constant feedback loop is going on, and actually the reason why stress is on every single chronic disease is because it's real. It's a
mhm,
real time effect on the human body. And it's not a generic excuse or reason. It's legitimate that, you know, in today's world, we're constantly running from a tiger at some low grade cowboy junkie way. You know, we
mhm,
have this
yeah,
low grade adrenaline dripping all the time. I jokingly call it cowboy adrenaline because when I was actually in a life or death situation, it was profoundly different than that low grade anxiety that I felt all
right,
the time, you know, of
yeah,
like just like zzz. It was actually profound. It was such an enlightening experience to see the difference between being in a life threatening situation and just being
mhm,
anxious and stressed out all the time.
right. And the things that
So
you're choosing to worry about in a lot of cases. Uh, yeah, yeah, and that's me too, believe me.
yeah, it's the monster upstairs for me.
Yeah,
So I'm constantly quieting the beast and just being like calm in my body, calm in my mind,
mhm,
chilling the fuck out. And that's why
yeah.
stimulants had to go. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and we discussed this on one of our calls, but it's like, and we're constantly being stimulated. Like we all work on screens and we're all constantly texting and emailing and connected to one another, like at all times. Nobody is off work anymore. Uh, so, and I didn't realize how taxed out I was, and that's why I had that caffeine crutch there was because, you know, it would give you that 1 to 2 hour kind of like pick me up and burst, and then you'd peak and then you'd crash, and then so you'd time for another one. And I mean, of course, everybody at work was doing espresso shots because they had, a guy who made great espresso there. So naturally, that's what you're going to do. But, it was at a certain point, you have to pay that price back because I was just constantly feeling drained no matter what I was doing. And it was like I'd sleep enough at night and I'd still wake up groggy. And like I'm finally at a point where those things I just don't feel that way anymore. And it's like you said, it's like all that extra white noise is finally starting to block out that would always just rattle around. And it's like, remember that thing 10 years ago that was super embarrassing? Well, think about it now. And it's like those thoughts have kind of like settled down more to where it's like I'm not just working myself up into a frenzy over nothing. It's like
since cutting out coffee, do you feel
oh yeah,
a more even, better energy throughout the day?
yeah, for sure. It's more consistent, and my sleep schedule is like I start getting tired at the same time every night, and it's like I need to start trying to find my bed. Um, and sometimes on the weekends I'll try and push through and stay up a little later and watch the end of the movie or whatever, and then I'll sleep an extra 30 minutes if the dog lets it happen. But it's one of those things that I have a very just regular sleep cycle where it's like, okay, I'm tired, ready to go to bed, and everything just kind of seemed like it settled into a more natural schedule once I wasn't trying to force the issue on like, okay, I got to get up and I got to get animated and I got to start moving and going and thinking that I needed those things in order to get through the day. Because that was definitely how I felt.
Yeah.
Like that there's no way I'll be able to do all the things I have to do if I don't have it. And then once you get rid of it and you do it, you're like, oh, like, why was I giving myself such a hard time? This was so much easier than I made it out to be.
Yeah. People
Yeah.
fight me tooth and nail as if they're an addict.
Yeah, I 100% addictive personality because I know how I was with trying to get out of caffeine
Yeah.
and because I had quit before. I had quit before for like a month and a half, and then I fell back into it just because of those social cues. I mean, that was the biggest thing was that I just wouldn't allow myself to say no, even though I needed to.
Yeah.
Um, and then finally, I just got to that point. And now it's like, I don't need it anymore. Like,
Yeah. And for I mean, basically for a lot of conditions it's not great. I would say I'm sure that there are people
yeah.
out there that, and I think actually what I was about to say is genetically can handle coffee and it doesn't bother them or they don't notice
Hmm.
it or whatever it is. I'm sure that there's people out there genetically. And I actually think the future, I think, is going to probably break down to a lot of genetics, like what people can and cannot handle in their body.
Oh yeah.
Um, but yeah, I sugar, caffeine, and then we bring ourselves down with alcohol. So that is
Hmm.
the over the counter prescription that
Yeah.
most Americans are on. It's like
Yeah. And that was one that, that was one that was easier for me to kick because I could see the direct correlation to how I felt to alcohol more than anything else, especially at the beginning of everything that was going on. So I was like, okay, this is clearly uh, not gonna work with this lifestyle anymore. And I mean, and I've known some people who have been able to get through it and everything like that. And I was like, yeah, the way my body interacts with it, I just was not in a place where I could do it. And I tried at the beginning because it was just like I wanted to have something that gave me a break or an outlet or whatever. But it was just like it was a disaster every time, and so it finally had the point where going to friends' weddings and stuff like that. Just kind of had to pass the drink to my girlfriend, and she was fine with that. So, but
yeah,
uh, but I mean, I was a bartender for a number of years in New York and worked in the hospitality industry. So it was like alcohol was a aspect of my life that I respected and enjoyed, and it was like a great part of like many friendships that I had living in New York and things like that. And so when that happened, there was a reluctance to get rid of it. And then I finally, when I booted it out of my routine and realized how much better I felt, then it was like, okay, well, and then I finally started applying that same logic to caffeine and sugar and everything else, and finally got to where it's like, okay, now we have balance, like,
yeah,
and that's what you're trying to get to.
yeah. And
Um,
that's the gift. And I think that mindset is not an easy place to get to. Where, and I'm really upfront and honest with people. Like, a couple times a month, I'll probably have an alcoholic beverage of whatever I want.
Hmm.
It's just not, it's not, it's not my coping mechanism, you know.
Hmm.
Like I have coping mechanisms for a stressful day. I meditate. For me, that helps recenter me.
Hmm.
One of my clients, I think, or friends, or somebody a long time ago said meditation was amazing because I was a horrible meditator my whole life, but I had other coping mechanisms. I had coffee in the morning and alcohol at night, right?
Hmm.
So those are my coping mechanisms for getting up and coming down.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It's,
so to learn how to meditate, like I could never sit still and actually do that. So in the beginning of the pandemic, before the pandemic had started, I had booked to learn Vedic meditation because
hmm.
I tried every other meditation and I tried group meditation and nothing really stuck with me. And one of my clients at the time was like just talking about her practice. And I was like, that sounds like something I could actually stick to. So I
Hmm.
went during crazy lockdown and curfews. I decided to still do the training. So I was like driving to Venice and doing these meditation trainings in the middle of like gnarly
Wow.
lockdown, police cars everywhere in the beginning when it was like super gnarly.
Wow.
And I'm sitting there like learning how to meditate. And it was probably
Yeah.
one of the best things I did because I was like, the first meeting of the day is with myself and the last meeting of the day is with myself. And
That's
those
awesome.
bookends to my day just suddenly, it was the salve that I needed. Like I was in a great
Hmm.
place and I wasn't eating sugar and I wasn't on caffeine, but I still didn't feel the level of calm that I would have liked to have. And
Hmm.
it just kind of like put me in that place. So for me, if I have an alcoholic beverage, is nor here nor there.
Hmm.
And things are no longer these tools that I used to have in my tool belt because now I have other tools in my tool belt of like, okay, I'm going to take this 20 minutes for myself and just breathe. And I'm just going to take
Yeah.
this 20 minutes for myself. And so if you're a person living in a body that's not like everybody else's, then you have to find other ways of connecting to yourself and to other people too.
Hmm.
And I don't know about you, how you feel about things opening up and how you feel about being challenged in that way, but I would imagine it's going to be interesting because I know it was for me, not even because I wasn't in a pandemic when I came out of eating for health and feeling well and
Right.
going into remission. It was just everyday life was already in motion, right? Um, so I remember having to like defend my castle and my boundaries while still feeling really uncertain as to how to do that, you know, and like, why
Yeah.
am I doing this? And you're on a medication and you're fine. And will I be okay if I have this stuff? And, you know, there were
Hmm.
so many questions and confusion for me around it.
And yeah, and finding, like you said, finding those coping mechanisms, because that was the biggest thing. Because I was working a job that I wasn't like happy with, and dealing with. Now it's like, okay, I'm sick, but at least I've got medicine, so like I should be able to treat myself to some of these things. But there was no way to cheat that system. Like you were just gonna feel worse. That was it. Like you do something bad, it's gonna have bad results. And so yeah, I think that that was one of the things that also played into, okay, so then I started going really heavy on caffeine and like just, okay, I'm going to get through the day by just being overly caffeinated, which was, I'm sure, horrible for me for so long. And the exact last thing that my stomach needed was to be any more going through any more stimulants or anything else that was wiring it up and getting it alive, and then plus the sugar stuff. But now it's one of those things where it's like I kind of find peace just zoning out and either listening to like my podcast and walking the dog, and or just going to the gym and getting in a workout that's just like I go into a zone by myself and just kind of hit that rhythm. And it's, yeah, it's very meditative, and that's kind of like where I get that time alone, to unplug and to just get through whatever those thoughts are that are in my head. And then, when I leave, I feel way better because it's like, A, I worked through those thoughts. Like I dealt with them, I addressed them with whatever needed to be addressed, and then I moved past them. And, and it's just taking care of my body. But I also had to start listening to my body more because it's like me with Crohn's couldn't do the things that I was doing when I was like 22 and not having Crohn's. And so it was like not overtraining and over pushing myself, and having respect for myself in a different way other than just constantly pushing myself into some new direction. It's like taking a step back. I remember I was saying something to you. It's like I used to get emails at work, and it would just be instant anxiety. It's like, oh, what does this person need? And now it's like, oh no, I can take a second, read the email, gather my thoughts, like figure out what they're really asking, and not be so immediately reactive to everything.
Triggered.
And
Yeah.
hmm
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like that's the perfect way to describe it because it was just, yeah, it was like somebody's firing a gun behind me. I'm like, okay, we got to get back to work now. So, and meditation is one of the things that I feel like I get my best meditation done when I'm doing something that allows me to like focus in on anything else other than trying to meditate.
Hmm.
Because
For sure. And I think that's a wonderful thing to know about yourself. Like
hmm
for me, hiking is a meditation.
yeah,
Um, I love walking and listening to a podcast. I have
hmm
ones that's the only time I get to listen to them because nobody in the house is interested in science. So I'll be like going for a walk, listening to my science
yeah,
people, So
that's
I feel that. And I always feel better when I come back. I always feel,
yeah, and it's nice. Like I find myself having to rewind podcasts a lot because they'll say something that gets me off on a thought, and then I'm off on my own world thinking about whatever that trigger was that got me thinking, and I'm like, oh man, I missed the past 5 minutes of conversation here, and they're talking about something else that's good. So, but I love those moments like that. It's where I have a lot of my best kind of aha moments of like probably one of the situations where I started thinking about caffeine more and more and more and more, and finally was like, this has to go, you know.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's it's been nice to find those things, and like the pandemic has at least afforded that because we're all at home. So it's like you have to find new coping mechanisms for everything now. 'Cause
Yeah.
you couldn't just go out like you wanted to.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Or get away from what you're thinking or feeling.
hmm
It's actually, I think that's been probably a great gift for some and a challenge for others
oh
because
for sure.
the inability to run away from the stuff that needs to be processed and worked through. And
hmm
um, so, well, you guys are amazing. You're amazing. Melissa's amazing. Thank
you
you. I mean, is
you're
there anything
incredible.
else you want to say?
Oh, sorry, this computer just turned on right behind me.
Okay, no
Uh,
worries. But thank you so much for being brave enough to do the protocol, to work through some of the resistance you had to going all in, to experiencing. I think it's such an
mhm.
incredible gift to experience all in, and then kind of like be present to that experience because I think otherwise we don't know what it all
Yeah.
is working together, right? When we're sitting on the edge with our feet in the pool just kind of going, I'm not going to jump all in, and that's fine too. Like everybody has their process. And
Oh yeah.
but I just want to say thank you for giving it a shot, for being brave enough to do it, and for being really conscientious with your journey and your medication. Like I'm also an incredible believer and thankful that we have these kind of medications out there that can save a life. I mean, basically,
hmm
these are life-saving things, and it
Oh yeah.
saved your life, right? We
Um,
can't bleed out. Like I didn't bleed as bad as some, but I just remember that feeling too of, of bleeding and realizing like, holy shit, there's something inside of me bleeding and I can't see it. It's like I can see a
right.
hand that is bleeding, but when you're bleeding internally, there's no greater sense of urgency, you know?
Yeah, and having that moment of like confronting your own mortality in a way because it's like you see that and it's so jarring,
Yeah.
and you don't know what the answer is going to be for that, and you don't know, what type of journey you're going to have to get to the other side of that. And so thank you for being here, and your process has been incredible. Like getting to meet with you has been incredible, and like I it's hard to put into words how thankful I am because of where I was and where I am now, and my family has seen it, and my friends have seen it, and like getting to tell that story, and it's you know still weird to people when I explain to them the whole process. It's like, so what are you doing? I'm just eating so many beans, but they I was like, beans, really? And then, I explain to people who are curious, but it's just, but thank you for being here and somebody who is, championing that and this protocol and reaching out there and being that person who's like, I've been through it, this works, and to guide people. Because, a lot of people just don't even know where to begin.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, I mean, I never expected to be here. I was in a career that I really loved and the people I worked with. And when I started doing this in the beginning, I was actually just coaching people for free who found my book, and I would send them to my mentor and be like, hey, work with her, but I'll coach you. And I would do it on the weekends. And I've even been to people's houses and locally, like who really needed, like the parents of somebody needed to talk to me and see me. And you know,
Mhm.
hear my experience. And I just remember being so happy to do that work. And little by little, those free consultations were the thing that I look forward to the most in my life, because I actually could see that I was making a difference in somebody's life. And that was like these little steps. And it's funny to be here now where I'm like, this is what I get to do every day, is empower people to take control of their health story, and know that where you
Mhm.
started isn't where you have to end up. Should you do the work? Should you commit? Should you overcome any excuses you have about how you can't? I mean, I was the biggest, I was guilty of thinking that somebody else was going to save me from myself.
Mhm.
And only to realize ultimately that I was going to be the one to save me was kind of like
Yeah.
a, so.
Yeah. And also it's very liberating to realize that like you actually have that power in your own hands and that it's not going to come down to being hooked up to a machine for the rest of your life or having to go through those extreme situations all the time. It could just be that bridge that gets you to the next part of your life, and that's where I feel like I'm at right now, is that it's like it's just incredible how much of my life I've gotten back doing this. Like when I think about it, it's overwhelming to think about how different it all is. And so yeah, that just thank you.
And thank you. And Melissa, thank you for finding the podcast and sharing it. And thank you for being brave enough to share your story. I'm always touched when I ask and the other person says yes. So thank you.
Well, I'm happy to help if anybody else is out there going through what I went through and my story helps motivate them to do it, then it's more than worth it to come and share my experience. So thank you
Cool.
for having me.
Well, if you want, I can put your handle down below. So if you want to talk to people, but that's totally
Yeah,
personal. But
absolutely.
cool.
If
All right.
if anybody wants to reach out to me and discuss what they've been through and I can share what I've been through going through this, I'd be happy to help out.
You're an angel. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful Sunday.
Thank you. You do the same.
All right. Bye.
Bye.